Tasmania's Integrity Commission was established following a series of political scandals. 6 months ago today, it opened its doors. Its Chief Commissioner, Murray Kellam, is a former Victorian Supreme Court judge. Among the numerous judicial posts he's held over the past 40 years, he's trained judges and magistrates in ethics. Next week, he's hitting the road, going to Launceston and Queenstown in the first of a series of information sessions across the state on how the Commission operates. He joined me in the studio earlier today. Murray Kellam, thanks very much for joining us. Given the primary role of the Commission is to raise the standard of conduct and ethics and propriety in the public sector through prevention and education, when will you start training politicians?
Well, we are working very hard at the moment on a code of conduct for politicians, which I must say came at the invitation of the Premier. We have a draft that will be ready very soon. Much work's been done. I might say that in putting it together, we looked at international and national comparisons. We've looked really around the common law world for the appropriate standards to say what's best practice. We've got a document that we would expect will be provided to Parliament relatively soon. I'm talking, 6 weeks, 2 months.
Today we've had a Minister, Lynn Thorpe, basically forced to apologise after a week of pressure for revealing information about private information about a political rival. Training of politicians on ethical behaviour would appear to be needed?
Look, I don't want to comment on that particular one and say whether that's a result of lack of training or otherwise. And I haven't seen the apology, I might say. I've only just heard a minute ago from you about it. Look, I think that as much training for anybody who's involved in governance, whether it's politicians, public servants, police or otherwise, is necessary. When
are we likely to actually start seeing some politicians who, want to be trained in ethics? When are we likely to see politicians receive some training?
Well, I'll just separate politicians at the moment from the public service. We are already meeting public service organisations and doing work on these things. In terms of Parliament, we have to respect their independence, and Michael Tate, as you know, has been appointed as the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner. He's there to provide advice on appropriate standards. I would hope that pretty soon we can have Parliament institute training. We don't necessarily have the power to require them to attend training. We are hoping that it'll be an encouragement process. We'll be producing standards, we'll be producing materials across the whole public sector. And I would hope that not only politicians but their staffs would be part of that process.
Is the events of this past week involving Lynn Thorpe, is that a matter that you are able to investigate in terms of own powers, or do you actually need, for this particular type of allegation, a written complaint?
There are really two sources of empowering us to commence an investigation as such, and the first is a complaint. Doesn't necessarily have to be in writing, but a complaint of some description, that's what the Act talks about. There's also an own motion process. At the moment it would appear that our legislation limits us somewhat in our investigative powers on an own motion process, and that's a matter I'll be taking up with the Attorney-General.
So there may be, you're suggesting that you would like to see some changes to the Act, that some may in fact be required?
Look, the Act, as you probably are well aware, was passed fairly quickly. This is a new organisation. It's a different organisation. It's not a copy of the Western Australian or the Queensland or New South Wales one. And yes, there will be glitches. I mean, you expect that with any new legislation about anything.
The Parliamentary Standards Commissioner, Michael Tate, has also suggested that he may need some clarification in terms of confidentiality. Are you aware of what those concerns specifically are?
Not specifically. I might say I have huge respect for Michael Tate, and if he's got a concern about it, he should have. I would say that there's a justification. The Act sets him up as an independent and confidential advisor for parliamentarians. And I think confidentiality is often important, and that's one area. I mean, if a politician has a serious ethical concern, the plan is that they would go to Michael and say, look, I've got a problem, can I get some advice on it? If there's doubt as to whether the advice that he gives is confidential and must remain so, it must be sorted out. I'm Not clear at the moment as to whether there is such doubt or not. I have heard the suggestion there is.
He's an advisor, not an investigator.
That's right.
There have been some calls for him to have investigated this matter that's arisen this last week. That's not his role.
Oh, look, I think it's a matter for him to define the role, but as I understand his position in the Act, he is there to provide confidential advice to parliamentarians, and that would not involve an investigation process.
The Commission's 6 months old today. 100 complaints received so far. Are you surprised by that number?
Yes and no. I had thought there probably wouldn't be quite that many, but on the other hand, there was no statute of limitations, so some
How
grievances...
old are some of those complaints?
Well, some of them many years. Some people had grievances that they have had for a long time. So that wasn't limited, and I think that was quite brave of Parliament, I must say, when they did it.
Taking into account the legal obligations of the Commission in terms of your rules of confidentiality, can you tell us anything about any of the nature of the complaints that you've received?
Look, the range of complaints we get are across the board in terms of departments. I think there are 1 or 2 departments that have not had a complaint made against them, but most have had 1 or 2, some more. There are complaints about police. I might say that the numbers of complaints in terms of percentage in Tasmania are far lower than interstate. So police, the complaints are based on a perception of excessive power, usually something of that sort. Government departments, conflict of interest seems to figure. That's the run.
Well, you hit the road next week, heading up north, and then you say to the west coast. And have a good road trip.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.